Chapter 1. Welcome to Diagon Alley. London, England. An owl swooped swiftly across the skies of London, scattering a group of small animals in the alley and catching the attention of a few passers-by. Seeing a bird of prey like an owl in the heart of London was quite a rare sight. But the ones who stopped to look were mostly children or out-of-town tourists. In contrast, the locals remained unfazed, looking like they'd seen it all before. Just an owl. Uncommon, sure, but not unheard of, especially in July, when they seemed to be everywhere. And it just so happened to be mid-July now. Tourists, always making a fuss over nothing. It was as if the old gents, plain short sleeves had turned into tailored suits. With an inexplicable sense of superiority, they lifted their chins and walked on with a spring in their step. No one noticed that after the owl flew over one street, it suddenly vanished. It was as though it had passed through a transparent veil. In the blink of an eye, the owl was soaring above a bustling street unlike anything nearby. Here, the people wore all sorts of bizarre clothing, some even sporting pointed hats. The buildings were equally strange, with architecture that looked like it belonged to a century long gone, maybe even earlier. Even though the view from the sky showed that this place was only a few feet away from the regular street, it felt like an entirely different world. Welcome to Diagon Alley. Below the owl, a drunken man shouted loudly, his voice slurred. But none of that mattered to the owl. It only wanted to finish its job quickly and get back to a nice dinner of delicious nuts. Flying on, the owl skillfully navigated around a cobblestone path and landed on the small windowsill behind Ollivander's wand shop. The window was clean, and inside, a boy around 10 years old was bent over something, fully engrossed. The next second, bang, something seemed to explode inside. Sparks flew, followed by a loud crack and a puff of black smoke. Hawthorne and Redcap nerves, what a fiery combo. Maybe Holly would work better. Harold Ollivander straightened up, muttering to himself as he looked at the floating red text in front of him. Hawthorne, Redcap nerve, 10.5 inches. Status, incomplete. Property, explodes at any time. Harold rubbed his forehead. It had been 11 years since he came to this world, and over time, he had grown used to the wizards coming and going around him, and gradually accepted his new identity. A member of a wand-making family. His grandfather was none other than Garrick Ollivander, the famed wandmaker with an extraordinary memory who could recall every wand he'd ever sold. From a young age, Harold had been able to see every wand's attributes, materials, and characteristics. He couldn't quite tell whether this was some sort of golden finger cheat or a unique Ollivander bloodline trait. Harold leaned toward the former, especially since he could forge wand cores out of materials that made no logical sense. Even Garrick Ollivander would struggle to craft a wand with a toad's tongue for a core, but Harold could, and with a decent success rate too. Impressive, in a way. But not very useful, Harold sighed. Still, over the years, under Garrick Ollivander's influence, he'd come to enjoy wand making more and more. What once felt like a redundant gift now seemed valuable. Shaking his head, Harold picked up another wand nearby and gave it a practiced flick. Scourgify. Reparo. The dust and smoke from the explosion vanished instantly, and the room returned to its pristine state. Only then did Harold turn toward the window. Nothing outside, just the busy street of Diagon Alley and a few brown feathers on the windowsill. Weird, I could have sworn I heard something tapping. He walked over and opened the window, picked up a feather, examined it, then slipped it into his pocket. Just then, a fluttering sound reached his ears. Harold instinctively looked down. A disheveled owl was glaring at him furiously, letting out a series of sharp screeches. Harold didn't understand owl speak, but judging by its face, it was definitely swearing at him, probably quite colorfully. Hey, it's not like the explosion was my fault, Harold muttered defensively. The owl clearly wasn't having it. With a loud thump, it threw the item clutched in its talons toward him and flew off without a backward glance. Well, safe travels, I guess. Harold shut the window and finally looked at what had been thrown on the floor. It was a pale yellow envelope, with emerald green ink spelling out. To Mr. Harold Ollivander, 2nd floor, Ollivander's Wand Shop, Diagon Alley, in front of the desk. He flipped the envelope over to reveal a wax seal, a crest featuring a lion, an eagle, a badger, and a snake encircling a large H. Oh right, mid-July. An owl-delivered letter. What else could it be but a Hogwarts acceptance letter? Only now did Harold realize, it was already July. Soon, he'd be a new student at Hogwarts. Strangely, he wasn't as excited as he'd imagined. If this had come 10 years ago, he'd probably have jumped for joy. Now, well, he was still excited, just not over the top. Besides, he'd found something he enjoyed even more than going to Hogwarts. Wand making. He had even considered how nice it would be if he didn't get a Hogwarts letter at all. That way, he could spend more time researching wandcraft. But of course, that wasn't possible. A child with magic would never not get a Hogwarts letter. Dumbledore didn't make mistakes like that. And even if he did, there was always Minerva McGonagall. Still, this wasn't so bad. Harold stretched his arms and casually set the envelope on the desk. Knock knock knock. Footsteps echoed from the floor below, quick and urgent. Harold picked up his wand and opened the door in advance. The next moment, I just saw an owl. A head popped in from outside. Was it the letter? Garrick Ollivander was still holding a measuring tape, his face filled with anticipation. Yep, Hogwarts letter, Harold said, pointing to the envelope on the desk. Ollivander's eyes immediately followed his finger, and upon seeing the familiar crest, he exclaimed. Wonderful. To be honest, I was actually leaning toward taking my mum's advice and going to Beauxbatons, Harold said, resting his chin in one hand thoughtfully. Alchemy would be really helpful for my research, but Hogwarts doesn't offer alchemy classes. And my dad, Mum, and grandmother all graduated from Beauxbatons. Mum even told me that her good friend just became headmistress there last year. It'd probably suit me better. Dumbledore had a big name, Chief Warlock of the International Confederation of Wizards, and widely regarded as the most powerful white wizard alive, but his eyes were only ever on Harry Potter and Voldemort. Not that he ignored regular students, but you couldn't expect him to be too invested. Beauxbatons, on the other hand, was different. His mum, Lila Ollivander, had graduated from there and remained close friends with Olympe Maxime, who had been a professor back then. They stayed in touch even after graduation. Now that Maxime was headmistress, it would have been far more convenient for Harold to go there. More importantly, in a few years, Voldemort would start planning his resurrection. Being at Hogwarts could get complicated. Hogwarts is still great, Ollivander's eyes darted about. And besides, we agreed, didn't we? He wanted Harold to attend Hogwarts, because Harold was the only one still willing to inherit the family wand-making craft. His son, Harold's father, Garion Ollivander, had loved wand-making as a kid, but after graduating from Beauxbatons, he fell in love with herbology and began traveling the world with his wife. His daughter, Harold's aunt, graduated from Ilvermorny and was now a well-known magizoologist. Somehow, both of them had careers loosely related to wand-making, but not quite. After much thought, Garrick concluded it must have been the school's fault. Ilvermorny and Beauxbatons were just too far away. Now that Harold had finally shown a genuine passion for wand-making, he was determined to keep him close and personally pass down everything he knew. There was just one small issue. Ollivander's face suddenly fell, as if remembering something unpleasant. The thing was, Harold had talent, and he worked hard, but his talent veered in a rather unconventional direction. Harold didn't like traditional wand cores. Unicorn tail hair, phoenix feather, and dragon heartstring weren't his style. Instead, he preferred some, well, downright heretical combinations. Like troll nose hair, red cap triple nerves, and Grindylow leg bones. Ollivander wouldn't even consider using those as wand cores, let alone actually try it, but Harold was all about it. He had tried to steer Harold back to the proper path, but obviously that hadn't worked. And he didn't dare push too hard. He feared Harold might do what his daughter had done, run off to Ilvermorny in a fit of anger after being yelled at. A little, off path, was better than losing the craft entirely. All right, it's not like I said I wouldn't go to Hogwarts, Harold shrugged, seeing Ollivander's pitiful, hesitant look. Come to think of it, Hogwarts had its perks. Sure, it might be a bit chaotic, but it was a treasure trove of rare materials, three-headed dogs, dementors, dragons, Voldemort, the Whomping Willow. Especially the Whomping Willow. The only one in the entire British wizarding world was at Hogwarts, and Harold had been eyeing it for ages. Oh, and then there was the Elder Wand in Dumbledore's possession. If he could just see it, it would be a huge help. Even if it didn't help, he still wanted to see that legendary wand, ideally even hold it, just once. Not likely, of course. But Harold was willing to wait. Opportunities always come eventually. End of chapter 2, Golden Legend. Hannah Abbott. Diagon Alley was even more crowded in late July. Helping out in the shop, Harold leaned forward to get a look at the little girl at the counter with two golden braids. I'm sorry, have we met before? 11-year-old Hannah instinctively looked up, trying to recognize this young wizard who looked about her age. He was a very handsome boy, his pale face still carrying a hint of baby fat typical of kids their age. His black hair was slightly wavy, a bit messy, hanging over his forehead like he'd just finished an intense Quidditch match. Without a doubt, out of all the peers Hannah had met, this shop boy was the best-looking one. But she didn't know him, not even a flicker of recognition. We haven't met before, but we might be classmates soon. I'm also starting at Hogwarts this year, Harold said. As for how I know you, he grabbed a brown leather-bound ledger from the side and flipped through it quickly. Oh, found it. Mr. Abbott's appointment from yesterday, 10 o'clock to pick out a new wand for his daughter. That sound about right, yes. A tall wizard stepped forward, frowning slightly at Harold. But I thought the shop owner here was Ollivander. Ollivander's wand shop. My grandfather never sold this place, that much is certain, Harold said with a half-joking smile. Hearing that, the man nodded and let out a breath of relief. They had come to get a wand for their daughter, who was starting at Hogwarts soon, but had been surprised to walk into the familiar wand shop and see a stranger behind the counter. For a moment, the man had even wondered if the store had changed hands. He wasn't being paranoid, it was just that, in all his memories, Ollivander had never hired any staff. Whether making or selling wands, he always did everything himself. That had been the case when the man was a student, and nothing had changed in all the years since. But then, he remembered the way the boy had referred to Ollivander. You said, grandfather? The man asked, a little curious. Harold Ollivander. Harold extended his hand. Ah, a pleasure. The man didn't seem the least bit thrown by Harold's young age, shaking his hand seriously and respectfully. Judging by your age, Garrick must be your grandfather. Strange, I don't recall ever seeing you. Probably because not many people come back to a wand shop, Harold shrugged. Ah, that's true. The man nodded in understanding. Wand shops weren't like other places. He hadn't been here in over 10 years. Today's visit was only because his daughter needed a wand for school. Bang! At that moment, a wild, frizzy head suddenly popped up from behind a shelf, nearly smacking into another one. Mr. Ollivander, the man called hesitantly. Customers. Ollivander looked up. Terribly sorry, just a moment, I'll be right there. He was holding a dusty old box as he hurried over to the counter, muttering under his breath. Found it, knew I wasn't wrong. It's only been 10 years, after all. What was that? Harold hadn't quite caught it and asked, glancing at the open box in his grandfather's hands. Is that the thing you've been looking for the past 2 days? Holly, phoenix feather, 11 inches. Status, perfect. Traits, righteous courage, dark magic -10%, light magic +10%. Disarming, Expelliarmus +20%. Twin, a matching wand with the same core exists. When the two meet, a mysterious effect will occur. Harold raised an eyebrow. No question about it, this wand was ridiculously overpowered. Brand new, unused, and already stacked with 3 distinct traits. It crushed 99% of the wands in the shop. If this were a video game, this Holly wand would at least be legendary gold. Top-tier stuff. Harold couldn't help but covet it a little, but he also knew, this wand was only meant for one person. No one else could wield it properly. Out of sight, out of mind. Harold turned his head away and stopped looking at it. Ollivander blinked. He found Harold's reaction a little odd but didn't think too much of it. Instead, he snapped right into work mode. Oh yes, hawthorn, 11 inches, dragon heartstring, exactly as it was. Feels like just yesterday, ellipsis. It was a pleasant transaction all around. 10 minutes later, young Hannah walked out of the wand shop, hopping along happily with her new wand. Ollivander, meanwhile, carefully recorded her name and wand details in a notebook, a habit he'd developed over many years. Harold turned his gaze back to the box. That's a wand too. Yes, Ollivander replied, looking up. What's special about it? Harold asked curiously. You went digging through storage just to find it. Special, you could say that. Ollivander thought for a moment, then nodded. I've got a feeling, the wand's true owner is about to show up. He looked mysterious, eyes shining with a bit of excitement. Harold was just about to ask more when a crisp chime rang through the shop. The sound came from the bell hanging behind the door. Someone had entered. No, Ron, we don't have the money to buy you a new wand. I think Charlie's old wand will do just fine, fine. A boy's sharp voice cut in as he held out a wand. Look at it, the unicorn hair's coming out. A noisy family poured in. Leading the way was a plump witch, followed by a tall, thin red-haired man and 6 children. So many red-haired kids, Harold instantly knew who they were. The Weasleys. Only they would be unable to afford a new wand for a first year. With so many of them filing in, the already small shop instantly felt packed and crowded. Bit cramped in here, isn't it? The man looked around. Fred, George, could I ask you to run over to the second-hand bookshop? Help Ron find his first-year textbooks. Happy to, Dad. Identical voices chimed in unison from 2 identical boys. They exchanged a knowing, mischievous glance and dashed out the door. Whether they were actually going to the bookshop, Harold seriously doubted it. The famous Weasley twins were not known for doing anything proper. Dad, I want to go somewhere else too, said another boy with horn-rimmed glasses. Of course, dear, go on, said the witch in front. You can think about what gift you'd like while you're out. I want a gift too, the youngest boy muttered. If you become a prefect, Ron, I'll get you a gift too, came the mother's firm reply. They had made it to the counter by now. Good morning. Ollivander offered them his usual professional smile. Wonderful to see you again, Molly Weasley, Arthur Weasley. Now, how many times have we met? If I'm counting correctly, this is our 6th visit, Mr. Weasley stepped forward, and every time, you've correctly recalled both Molly's and my wand materials, never once made a mistake. Harold noticed that his grandfather, who had just opened his mouth to say something, suddenly shut it again, like he'd just swallowed his words. End of chapter 3, The Giant and the Boy. Ollivander only responded to Mr. Weasley's teasing with a polite smile, saying nothing more. Even though they didn't follow the standard routine, he didn't really mind. After saying the same things so many times, skipping it once hardly mattered. So you're here today to buy a new wand for this young Mr. Weasley, is that right? Ollivander looked toward the smallest boy in the group. The Weasleys had a lot of children and came in almost every year. In a way, they were regulars. No, actually, Mrs. Weasley shook her head. We're here to get Charlie a new wand. He's about to start working at a dragon reserve. Ollivander paused for a moment, his eyes scanning the group until they landed on the youngest boy's wand. Or rather, the wand in his hand. It was in terrible shape, cracked and chipped, with patches peeling off. One end was even glowing faintly white. Merlin's beard, that was unicorn hair. Ollivander took a deep breath. He had never seen a wand in such poor condition so soon after graduation. It looked worse than wands that had been used for 20 or 30 years. Clearly, it had never been cared for, and the owner had treated it with complete disregard. Ollivander's expression darkened, and even his voice turned cold. Yes, I can see that. Working with dragons definitely requires a functional wand. He put heavy emphasis on the word functional. The Weasley couple knew exactly why he was upset, and though they both flushed a little, they had no choice but to pretend nothing was wrong. Charlie would be dealing with dragons, and a quality wand from Ollivander was essential. Fortunately, Ollivander didn't say much else, he just gave them a bland look. But I should remind you, this Mr. Weasley is not a first year. That means no student discount. We understand, Mrs. Weasley replied quickly with a nod. Ollivander gave a brief nod in return and said no more. How about I handle this one? Harold stepped in, having noticed his grandfather didn't really want to deal with Charlie. Let me pick a wand for this customer. Under normal circumstances, Ollivander would never have allowed Harold to take over. After all, Harold was only 11 years old, far too young to be selecting wands for others. But this time, Ollivander only hesitated for a moment before nodding in agreement. Then I'll leave it to you, dear Mrs. Weasley said with a sigh of relief. She knew Harold. Unlike most families, who only visited a wand shop once in a lifetime, the Weasleys were practically regulars. They'd seen Harold the first time Percy came for his wand, and again when the twins got theirs. This was the 3rd time now, not exactly close, but certainly not strangers. Harold glanced at Charlie, then at Ron, and a string of data instantly floated into view. Willow, unicorn tail hair, 14 inches. Status: damaged. Trait: magic attenuation. Damaged wand leads to weakened spell power. Replacement recommended: a standard wand. Nothing special, not worth referencing. I heard you're headed to a dragon reserve. Yes, I leave in a few days, Charlie nodded. Then how about oak? Harold mused aloud. Oak contains power, usually drawn to steadfast wizards. Seems like it would pair well with dragons. As for the core, Weasleys are perfectly compatible with unicorn hair. No need to consider alternatives. Lengthwise, maybe around 10 inches, Harold added, glancing again at the 14-inch willow wand. Shorter makes it easier to draw quickly, which can be useful in emergencies. Charlie's opinion was unknown, but Ollivander's eyes were lighting up more with each word. The moment Harold finished speaking, he had already found the matching wand. Oak, unicorn hair, 10 1/3 inches, exactly what Harold had described. Ollivander handed the wand to Charlie. He was already too intrigued to stay annoyed. When Charlie didn't move, he even gave a little push. Well, don't just stand there. Go on, try it. Huh, oh, Charlie instinctively gave the wand a wave. A cluster of blooming orchids burst from the tip. Perfect, Ollivander exclaimed without hesitation. Even through the most professional lens, there was nothing to criticize. This wand suited Charlie perfectly, possibly even better than his old one ever did. One thing had to be said. This wand had chosen Charlie, even if he was the kind of brute who didn't know how to treat wands properly. This is great, I really like it. Charlie clearly loved his new wand. Mrs. Weasley blinked in confusion. Wait, that's it. She was an old customer, but this was the first time she'd seen a wand purchase go so fast. Just a few glances, no measuring arms or shoulders, no trying out multiple combinations, done just like that. And Charlie was totally satisfied. He'd already slipped the wand into his coat pocket. Seeing that, Mrs. Weasley said nothing more and reluctantly paid 17 galleons to purchase the wand. That was the real price of a wand. Honestly, selling to first years for 7 galleons was barely making anything. Take Charlie's wand just now. The unicorn hair alone cost 9 galleons. Add in the specially treated wand wood, and that was another galleon at least. Luckily, the Ministry of Magic provided a 5 galleon subsidy for each first year's wand purchase, just enough to avoid losses. Ollivander's wand shop had been crafting wands since 382 BC and had pretty much monopolized the wand market in Britain, but it didn't actually make much money. After all, most wizards weren't going to spend galleons on a second wand. Over the following days, Harold stayed in the shop to help out. During that time, he met Hermione. Professor McGonagall brought her in to buy a wand. Vine wood, dragon heartstring, 14 3/4 inches. Status: perfect. Traits: none. A perfectly ordinary wand. In fact, 90% of new wands were like that. Over time, however, wands would change depending on their user. Just like Professor McGonagall's wand. Fir wood, dragon heartstring, 9 1/2 inches. Status: good. Traits: Transfiguration Mastery minus 50% magic cost when using Transfiguration, Minerva McGonagall only. Transfiguration Expert plus 30% casting speed for Transfiguration, Minerva McGonagall only. Insight, high chance to dismantle opponent's Transfiguration, Minerva McGonagall only. 3 traits, all related to Transfiguration, all bound to McGonagall. This was an example of the wizard influencing the wand. If someone else used it, the traits wouldn't vanish entirely, but they'd be significantly weaker. Ellipsis. Soon, the final day of July arrived. That morning, Harold had gotten to the shop early. He was waiting for a very special customer. But the entire morning passed, and that person never came. Harold had no choice but to keep waiting patiently. Until the afternoon, shortly after lunch, the door finally creaked open once more. With the familiar jingle of the bell, in walked a skinny, timid-looking boy who resembled a nervous chick. Behind him was a giant of a man, easily 11 feet tall. End of chapter 4. The Savior, the Wand, and Fate. Good afternoon. Ollivander switched into shopkeeper mode instantly. Harold noticed that the moment Ollivander got a clear look at who had entered, his eyes lit up like 2 bright moons in the dim shop. Hello. The boy looked nervous, hunching as he stepped through the door, carefully avoiding contact with anything around him, constantly glancing back at the giant behind him. Oh yes, I knew I'd be seeing you soon, Harry Potter. You have your mother's eyes. When she came here for her first wand, Ollivander drifted into memory. It was rare for him to speak so much before even reciting wand specs. The more he talked, the more anxious Harry seemed. Meanwhile, as the two interacted, Harold's gaze stayed fixed on Hagrid. He noticed something hidden under the open coat, a pink umbrella, half exposed. And when Ollivander mentioned Hagrid's broken wand, the half-giant instinctively clutched at the umbrella. That kind of disguise was pointless. Especially in front of Harold. Willow Oak Phoenix Feather, 16 inches. Status: Trait: unbreakable. After undergoing some unknown transformation, this wand seems to have changed in strange ways. No one wants to be poked by it. The status field was blank, probably due to it having been broken and then repaired. Maybe Harold's stare was a little too obvious, because Hagrid suddenly grew uneasy, tightening his coat to hide the umbrella and slowly shuffling toward the door. It's just an ordinary umbrella, nothing to look at. I can fix it for you. What? Hagrid froze, his pillar-like leg even trembling slightly. I don't know what you're talking about, it's just an old umbrella. Doesn't need fixing. Yep, that's all. I don't think so, Harold said, shaking his head thoughtfully. Everyone thinks the wand core is the most important part, but that's not true. It's the seemingly ordinary wood of the wand itself that holds the real secrets. Hagrid's expression turned increasingly serious. Ollivander, listening nearby, didn't seem to mind, he just assumed Harold was lecturing about wand lore. Fixing a core isn't that hard. But wand wood, that's different. Even with powerful magic, you can't restore it to how it was before. Over time, it might crack again. That's when you'd need magical tape or some outer layer to reinforce it, like, say, an umbrella handle. Then what should Hagrid blurted out, only to quickly cover his chest again. I was just curious. It's easy to fully repair a wand, Harold continued, pretending not to notice his reaction. You just need a skilled wandmaker, like Ollivander. Hagrid was listening intently, but just then, Harold turned away and stepped back behind the counter. You must be a professor at Hogwarts too. Nice to meet you, Harold said, leaving the matter there. Even when Hagrid looked over at him again, all he got was a bright, sunny smile, one only an 11-year-old could pull off. But Hagrid wasn't smiling. Everything Harold said had been dead on. After decades, Hagrid's repaired wand was full of cracks again, and he'd reinforced it with an extra layer of willow just to keep it together. Dumbledore's spellwork was strong enough that the cracks didn't affect functionality, but it was still a constant worry. He'd always wanted to get it properly fixed. And just when he wasn't expecting it, Harold had offered him a glimmer of hope, only to drop the subject at the most critical moment. Hagrid stood there frozen, staring at Harold with a painful, awkward expression, and that look didn't fade until they left the shop. The door opened, then shut again. Harry stepped out, full of wonder and hope for the magical world. Through the dusty glass, Ollivander watched the two slowly receding figures and sighed. So this is fate. In the end, he still took that wand. Harold shrugged, neither agreeing nor denying. A few days ago, Ollivander had been digging through boxes and finally found that wand from 10 years ago, the one Harold had mentally ranked as legendary gold. So he had been preparing for Harry Potter's visit all along. TCH, the old fox of a wandmaker. Luckily for Ollivander, he had no idea what disrespectful thoughts Harold was having. He simply continued, I did think about letting him try some other options. Other options? Ollivander didn't answer. He just pointed to the pile of wands on the table, ones Harry had already tried. None of them had worked. Harold scanned them, narrowing his eyes. Beechwood and dragon heartstring, favored only by those with both wisdom and bravery. Maple and phoenix feather, ever-growing, full of potential. Ebony and unicorn hair, power and loyalty, never forgetting one another. In the wand lore passed down through the Ollivander family, these combinations nearly mirrored the personality of a destined hero. Yet none of them matched. Harry had still ended up with the wand tied to his fate. Holly, purity, rebirth. Phoenix feather, hope, rebirth. After studying wand lore, Harold realized these materials shouldn't normally be paired, they overlapped too much. You can't be reborn unless you've died first. And, purity, did that mean the purity of the soul? That fragment of Voldemort's soul? Harold suddenly regretted staring at Hagrid so much earlier. He should have been watching Harry more closely. What are you thinking about? Ollivander's voice snapped Harold out of his thoughts. Nothing, he said, shaking his head. Just wondering which house I'll be sorted into. They're all wonderful, as long as you're at Hogwarts, Ollivander said without hesitation. And I nearly forgot. You haven't even chosen a wand for yourself yet. That thought seemed to get him excited again. Well, want me to help you pick one? A new wand? Harold blinked. Do I need one? He said, pulling a handful of, well, technically wands, from his pocket before Ollivander could respond. Unlike the traditional straight shape, Harold's wands were all unconventional. Curved, semicircular, perfectly round, right-angled, Z-shaped, lightning-shaped, a whole handful, about 7 or 8. And that wasn't all he had, just all he could hold in one small hand. Ollivander's forehead instantly throbbed with a few twitching veins at the sight of those oddly shaped wands. At least the craft is passed on. He took a deep breath, trying to convince himself to embrace innovation. After all, he'd tested those wands. They worked. Whether they worked well was another matter. But they were real wands, and that was enough. Besides, when he was 11, he was still carving sticks. Harold, at 11, had already made real, functioning wands, multiple ones. That kind of talent wasn't just rare, it was unprecedented. You could dig back through the entire Ollivander family tree and still not find someone who matched it. So what if he liked bending wands into circles? Big deal. Just swing them around. Before the next customer arrived, Ollivander had finally, more or less, talked himself into accepting it. But from that moment on, he never mentioned the subject of Harold getting a proper wand again. It was as if he'd never brought it up at all. End of chapter 5, Preparations before school. Although Harold didn't need a new wand, there were still plenty of other things to buy. He'd been living in Diagon Alley since he was 6. Now at 11, nearly every shopkeeper in the area knew him by name. He didn't even need to open his acceptance letter. A simple stroll around the alley was enough for him to know exactly what he needed. "Harold, I knew you'd be coming, your new books are all right here, pre-wrapped." "Thank you, Madam Blot. So how much do I owe you?" "2 galleons altogether. How's that for a discount?" "Impossible to refuse," Harold said sincerely. 8 books for 2 galleons, Madame Blot at Flourish and Blots had likely charged him no more than cost price. That kind of treatment had nothing to do with Harold himself. It was probably all thanks to Ollivander. A favor returned for the new wand discount. Maybe. Harold went on to purchase a full set of pewter cauldrons, a brass telescope, a standard potions ingredient kit, and 3 plain sets of robes, gloves, cloak, and all. Every item came with a discount no regular student could hope to get. He saved quite a bit. The herbology shop owner even gave him nearly 1.5 times the standard portion of ingredients. They weren't worth much, but the thought counted. Harold accepted everything with a warm smile. All went smoothly, except for Elop's Owl Emporium. Harold couldn't figure out why the owner, Madame Theodore, was being so overly enthusiastic. She insisted on giving him a free owl as a gift for starting school. And owls weren't cheap. Even the most basic breeds cost 10 galleons, and the better ones could easily be double that. Naturally, Harold refused. He stared at the woman across from him. She looked nearly 60, scratching his head in confusion. Truthfully, he wasn't close to Madame Theodore at all. He'd barely seen her a handful of times. Why was she being so generous? Out of caution, Harold declined the extravagant gift. But she was so insistent that in the end, he reluctantly picked a different pet. A tabby cat, probably. It looked like a tabby, but the coloring was dull and patchy, a bit grayish overall. Harold had spotted it curled in a corner with a squashed-faced ginger long hair. No one was interested in either, even though they were dirt cheap. 1 galleon, only 5 sickles more than the cheapest rats, and even less than most toads. That was exactly why Harold picked it. At that price, he could accept the cat without guilt. As for why he didn't choose the ginger one, well, he didn't have a thing for crushed soda cans, especially the flattened kind. Even after Madame Theodore tried to talk him into swapping for a prettier, purebred cat with a better temperament, at the same price, Harold stuck to his choice. Until he figured out her true intentions, he wasn't about to accept such a generous offer. Truthfully, he even wanted to pay for the cat, but Madame Theodore wouldn't take the money, saying Harold had done her a huge favor. "That cat's too fierce. You'd better be careful at school, it might end up eating someone's rat or toad." Harold eyed the tabby now lazily sprawled across his arm and took her warning with a grain of salt. Still, even if it was a bit vicious, that was fine by him. Once school started, he wouldn't have the time or energy to pamper a pet. A little wildness might help it fend for itself. Ellipsis. An hour later, Harold pushed open the door of the wand shop, his arms full of supplies. He planned to give a few of the more generous shopkeepers a wand care kit as a thank you gift, along with a sheet of custom wand stickers. The stickers were something he'd made last year, inspired by chocolate frog cards. They moved, but didn't randomly vanish. Plenty of people didn't mind paying a single sickle to stick a tiny Dumbledore onto their wand. Ollivander, however, had always thought the things were a scam. He allowed Harold to stock them in the shop, but never advertised them. As a result, Few people even knew they existed, and sales were modest. Then there was the color-changing spray. You could tint your wand any shade you liked. But Ollivander had completely forbidden Harold from selling that in the shop. Harold had no choice but to lock it in a chest. This time, though, he planned to bring it to school, see if he could find a new market. Deep down, Harold understood why Ollivander was against it. A wand needed to be discreet, especially for aurors and others in dangerous work. Matching the color of wood was ideal camouflage. Just imagine someone drawing a bright red wand during a stealth mission, it'd be like casting a lumos on their face. But at Hogwarts, totally fine. No students needed to sneak around and duel in the dark. Besides, teenagers loved being different. Who could resist dyeing their wand a bold new color? Thinking this over, Harold opened a small pouch. Inside were about 30 galleons and a few sickles. That was all his spending money so far. For someone his age, that wasn't bad. Most first years had maybe 7 or 8 galleons to last the whole school year. But Harold had a lot of expenses. He made wands. Wand cores cost money, so did special wood for wand shafts. And once he was at school, he wouldn't be able to dip into the family stash whenever he wanted. Anything he needed, he'd have to buy himself. Thinking that, 30 galleons started to seem insufficient. Maybe he'd make the red and gold sprays, rare editions, and double the price. Green and silver could go triple. Harold made a mental note. Purely a business decision. He totally wasn't targeting anyone. Ellipsis. After getting their first glimpse of the magical world, some Muggle-born kids found it hard to leave. They came to Diagon Alley almost every day. Some didn't even bother learning how to tap the right brick to enter, they just booked a room at the Leaky Cauldron. Old Tom had prepared plenty of rooms in advance and made a tidy profit. By August, Diagon Alley was buzzing. Every shop was packed wall to wall with people, except the wand shop. Wands weren't consumables. Aside from the annual wave of first years, repeat customers were almost unheard of. Which suited Harold just fine. He spent the calm before school rummaging through the storeroom. It was packed with high-quality wand wood that Ollivander had spent decades gathering from across the world. Every single piece was premium. Ollivander had been reluctant to let him touch it before, but now that Harold had received his Hogwarts letter, the old man had finally loosened up. To Harold, it was like falling into a vault full of niffler bait. His eyes practically glowed. Applewood soaked in pine resin for a full year. Yes, please. Ironwood, hard to work with, but rare. Mine. Sycamore, excellent with phoenix feathers, perfect. Hogwarts had a phoenix, after all. Taken. Vinewood, meh, but why not? Not taking it would be a waste. As he approached the back, Harold suddenly froze, eyes locked on a reddish-brown branch sitting on a shelf. Merlin above. Was that the main trunk of a 1,300-year-old dragonblood tree? His dear grandfather had been hiding something this good. Behind him, Ollivander's face went pale. He rushed forward to stop him. Dragonblood trees were common enough, Romania had plenty. But one that had lived for over 13 centuries. Rare didn't even begin to cover it. Because of its sulfuric scent and tough texture, dragons loved chewing on the stuff. It was basically a chew toy for fire breathers. A branch that had survived over 1,000 years of dragon gnawing and still stayed intact. Practically a miracle. Ollivander had only ever found one, this piece. But young people react fast. Before he could say a word, Harold had already snatched the branch and stuffed it into his robe. Giving it back? Not a chance. A man of honor doesn't go back on his word. That would be the act of a dark wizard. Was Ollivander a dark wizard? Of course not. And Harold wasn't about to let his dear grandfather become a man who broke his promises. The result? The poor first years who came in for wands after that were met with quite a sight. They'd walk in, excited to buy their very first wand, only to be greeted by a grumpy, disheveled old man muttering under his breath with a stony expression. Some of the more timid kids nearly burst into tears. A few didn't even want to buy a wand anymore. Ollivander had truly done a number on them. Let's just hope the trauma didn't scar their young minds too badly. End of chapter 6. How could you say that? August passed in the blink of an eye. On September 1st, Ollivander personally took Harold to a back alley just outside King's Cross Station via the night bus. It's outrageous. It's your very first day of school, and Garion and Lila didn't even send a single letter. That was the third time Ollivander had complained about his son and daughter-in-law that morning. It was obvious he wasn't pleased. But Harold didn't seem to mind. Botanists are always like that. They'll wait months just to see a flower bloom. Haven't you gotten used to it by now? I just think it's unfair to you, Ollivander sighed. It's a big day, after all. Then you're overthinking it, Harold replied. He genuinely didn't care. I'm glad you feel that way. As Harold was trying to think of a way to comfort his indignant grandfather, he suddenly felt a strong clap on the shoulder. Well then, I'll drop you off here. To Harold's disbelief, Ollivander pulled out his wand. Mr. Drew wrote to me last night. He's found a grove of pine trees in the forests of Dorset where bowtruckles are nesting. The trees are all over 300 years old. I need to go see it right away. Good luck. Then, before Harold could say a word, Ollivander vanished with a pop. Meow, yowl. Tom, seeing apparition for the first time, was startled out of his fur. His back arched high, every hair standing on end. By the way, Tom was the name Harold had given his oddly scruffy pet cat. No special meaning, he just felt foreign cats should be named Tom. It's okay, relax, Harold gently soothed the feline. No Wandmaker can resist the call of bowtruckles, especially when it's a newly discovered colony. Totally normal. More accurately, Ollivander wasn't interested in the bowtruckles themselves, but in the trees they lived in. Not just any wood could be made into a wand, magic wasn't that casual. There were many conditions. One of the most important was getting the bowtruckles' approval. Only branches from trees they nested in could be used. Otherwise, no matter how old or fine the wood was, it'd be worthless. Well, dragonblood wood was an exception, it always passed inspection, though bowtruckles never dared live in it. There weren't many quality wand trees left in Britain, which was why Ollivander was so eager to go abroad. Harold looked around. Luckily, the alley was secluded, with no muggles nearby. Tom seemed to understand and calmed down, curling back up on top of Harold's suitcase. Ellipsis. Harold entered King's Cross Station, grabbed a trolley, and made his way toward Platform 9. It was his first time there, but Platform 9 3/4 was famous. Harold had no trouble finding it. Within 10 minutes, he reached his destination, the small, warded section between platforms 9 and 10. When he arrived, a round-faced boy was nervously approaching one of the walls, moving so cautiously it was like he feared he'd crack his skull. That timid behavior didn't sit well with the oddly dressed older woman nearby. Don't act like a coward, Neville. Run through it, quickly. Lady Longbottom barked. Startled, the boy jolted forward and disappeared through the wall with his trolley. Well, charged through, wasn't quite right. To Harold, it looked more like Neville had tripped from the shock, stumbling face first into the barrier. But Lady Longbottom seemed unaware. She looked quite pleased with Neville's decisiveness and nodded with satisfaction. Then her gaze shifted to Harold. You're here for the Hogwarts Express too, aren't you? Harold nodded, finding the question a little odd. Who else would be at King's Cross at this hour if not someone heading to Hogwarts? Sightseeing. What year are you in? First year, Harold replied honestly. Neville's in first year too. She looked him over again and finally noticed he was alone. Alone, another muggle born whose family couldn't handle the idea of magic. HMPH. Happens every year. Well then, child, if you're looking for the platform, she raised a hand and pointed to the barrier. Just run through it. Close your eyes if you're scared. Clearly, she'd misunderstood something. Harold opened his mouth to clarify, but after a moment's pause, he changed his mind. Thank you. It wasn't a big deal, after all. He put on a look of sudden realization, then pushed his cart straight toward the wall. As he passed through the barrier. Hope you and Neville end up in Gryffindor. It's the best house. Then the world around him shifted in an instant. Harold didn't care about the change in scenery. His mind was still stuck on what she'd said. Gryffindor. Absolutely vile. Harold froze, mentally cringing. Him, a Wandmaker, to be sorted into Gryffindor. A house where people acted first and thought later. Where duels broke out over 3 words. Sure, not every Gryffindor was like that, but calling it the headquarters of hot-headed brawlers wasn't far off. To group him with that lot. That was an insult. Unforgivable. Harold turned back toward the barrier, wanting to go back and ask her to rephrase her blessing. He seriously could not be sorted into Gryffindor. That would be a disgrace to his craft. But before he could do anything, someone else came through the barrier behind him, forcing Harold to step aside. Oh, sorry, didn't hit you, did I? A trolley brushed his arm as it passed. No. Harold stepped aside slightly, only to hear. You're a first year, aren't you? As a prefect, I must remind you not to loiter at the entrance, it blocks others from coming through. I understand, Harold said, eyeing the red-haired boy with horn-rimmed glasses, who kept adjusting the prefect badge on his chest every half-minute. Percy Weasley, an acquaintance, though it seemed he didn't recognize Harold. Harold said nothing. He was already annoyed from being blessed into Gryffindor. Now here was someone who couldn't go 10 seconds without saying prefect. He was even more annoyed. Arguing was out of the question. Harold wasn't the type. Is prefect another word for big-headed boy? Huh, well, if you like it. Harold raised an eyebrow at his badge with a look one might give a troll, turned around, and walked off, barely stopping himself from pinching his nose. After all, he was just a new student. He didn't even know what a prefect was. Totally reasonable. Besides, the badge really did say, big-headed boy. Percy's face turned bright red. Worse, his twin brothers, Fred and George, had been watching the whole exchange at the platform entrance, and were now doubled over laughing. You two definitely tampered with my prefect badge. Lies. We did not. I'm telling Mum. The platform became a circus of bickering, but none of it had anything to do with Harold. By then, he was already dragging his luggage aboard the train. End of chapter 7. Don't call me a Wandmaker. The Hogwarts Express, a vintage steam train, was slow and not exactly luxurious. Its only redeeming feature was the scenic countryside visible along the way. Or so Harold had heard from other wizards. He was about to find out for himself. He hadn't arrived particularly early, and most compartments were already full. Eventually, near the rear of the train, he found an empty one. Lucky, he muttered, pulling out his wand and pointing it at his trunk, giving a little upward flick. Wingardium Leviosa. The trunk floated upward in a rather wobbly and awkward manner, crawling into position on the luggage rack with clear effort. Actually, it's Leviosa, not Leviosa. Your emphasis and pause were both off. The sudden voice startled Harold. A brown-haired girl had opened the compartment door and marched in without hesitation, sitting down right across from him. Trailing behind her was a nervous, round-faced boy. Hi, I'm Hermione Granger. And this is Neville Longbottom, she introduced brightly. Hello, I'm Harold Ollivander, Harold replied. We were looking for seats and saw you trying the levitation charm. I've tried it too, it went well. I've memorized all of Standard Book of Spells, Grade 1, plus several supplemental texts I bought on my own. Have you? Her words poured out in a rapid-fire torrent, ending in a tone that was slightly overbearing. I haven't, Harold said flatly. And frankly, I don't see the point of wasting time memorizing textbooks before school even starts. Hermione blinked, clearly not expecting that kind of response. The atmosphere went awkward in an instant. Neville, desperately trying to ease the tension, opened his mouth a few times but couldn't find the words. He looked close to panicking. But honestly, he was overthinking it. Neither Harold nor Hermione cared much. Harold simply didn't. Hermione was used to this kind of reaction. I'm the only one in here. If you don't mind, we can share the space. Thank you, Hermione said. She had no intention of leaving anyway. The train was about to depart, she wouldn't find another empty spot. Once they'd stowed their things, Harold pulled out a thick hardcover book and began reading near the window. The platform outside was still chaotic with parents seeing off their kids, but Harold ignored the noise. He read intently, occasionally pulling out a stick of wood and using a small knife to shave it here and there. At some point, the train had already left the station, rolling past golden wheat fields and distant villages. But the compartment wasn't any quieter. Mostly because of Hermione. From the moment she sat down, she hadn't stopped talking. She rattled on to Neville about the books she'd read, the spells she'd memorized, how much she'd prepared. Chirping away like a parrot showing off its feathers. Harold had known about Hermione's personality beforehand, but experiencing it firsthand was something else. The fact she could ramble on for 2 hours about basic spells was truly impressive. Even more baffling was Neville, who kept nodding and agreeing like he wasn't even mildly annoyed. Harold had assumed it would go on like that until they reached Hogwarts, but he was wrong. Eventually, Hermione's attention shifted to him. What book are you reading? She'd clearly been dying to ask. She leaned forward, craning her neck to peek. Maybe we could compare notes. I got a lot of extra reference books too, A History of Modern Magic, The Rise and Fall of the Dark Arts, Important Magical Events of the 20th Century. Yours is. Smack. Just as she leaned in, Harold reflexively snapped the book shut, blocking her view. His abrupt action made Hermione freeze. Her expression shifted. This time, she looked offended. I wasn't going to steal it. I could have let you borrow mine too. No, you misunderstood. Harold quickly shook his head. Actually, this book is magical. Looking at its contents without care might cause complications. A magical book? Hermione clearly wasn't buying it. How could a book be not safe to read? She'd been to the bookshops in Diagon Alley. She'd browsed through plenty of books just fine. He's right, Neville suddenly piped up. There are lots of books in the magical world you're not supposed to read casually. His voice was small, but his face was solemn, like he was repeating sacred knowledge. My gran told me once about a cursed book. The person who read it could only speak 1 word per second afterward. Not sure if it's true. It is, Harold added quietly. I've met that person, actually. You've met them? Hermione's eyes widened. Her voice jumped in pitch and volume. She looked from Harold to the book, then practically flung herself backward, pressing against the wall of the compartment. She absolutely did not want to be stuck only speaking 1 word per second. That would be terrifying. You're overthinking it. This book's not like that. Harold gave the book a little shake. On the cover were 2 crossed wands, with faded, worn lettering. The book looked ancient. Hermione squinted and could just barely make out the word, Ollivander, on one of the wands. Wait, Ollivander, I knew I'd seen you before. She blurted, startling Neville again. But Hermione didn't even notice. She locked eyes with Harold. I saw you at the wand shop. You were standing right next to Mr. Ollivander. Well, aren't you clever? Harold said dryly. You even remembered the Wandmaker's name. If your memory were just a little sharper, maybe you'd have recalled my introduction too. Remember it, Harold Ollivander. Hermione's cheeks flushed red. She'd been so busy correcting Harold's spellcasting earlier, she hadn't really paid attention to what he'd said. Of course I remembered. I just didn't connect the dots, she mumbled. Harold didn't press the point. He rolled his shoulders and stretched his neck. Turns out, everyone was right. Hogwarts Express really was uncomfortable. He was already stiff and sore. Across from him, Hermione was still watching him, mouth open like she had something to say, but hesitating. That hesitation didn't last long. Just as Harold returned to his book. So, are you a Wandmaker too? Harold's expression shifted slightly. He looked at the two of them with a rare seriousness. If possible, I'd prefer you use the proper term, wand craftsman. What's the difference? Harold didn't answer right away. After a pause, he said, think of it like the difference between cat and tabby cat. End of chapter 8, a completely unsuitable wand. Hermione sat there puzzled, not understanding why Harold cared so much about that form of address. But seeing how serious he looked, she didn't say anything else, just nodded and replied, all right, no problem. She could be a bit stubborn and self-righteous, but that didn't mean she had zero emotional intelligence, maybe not a lot, but she had some. If he didn't like it, then she simply wouldn't say it. It was just a title, after all, not exactly complicated. Easy enough. So, you're a Wandmaker too? Hermione asked again. Harold thought for a moment. I guess you could say I'm halfway there. Since Hermione would later become one of the trio, Harold didn't mind chatting with her a bit more. Besides, the train ride was too bumpy, trying to read while being jolted around was unbearable. Even Tom, who usually didn't mind his surroundings, couldn't take it anymore. He squeezed out from between the suitcases and flopped onto the table, looking dizzy. Harold picked him up and gently stroked his fur as he continued, strictly speaking, I'm still an apprentice. I can only call myself a wandmaker after officially selling 10 wands. How many have you sold so far? Hermione asked, though her eyes kept drifting toward the cat in Harold's arms. No wonder he used a cat as an example earlier. And she hadn't expected Harold's pet to be just an ordinary stray-looking cat. So ordinary it could have been mistaken for a feral alley cat. Hermione had rarely seen anyone keep such a cat. Most of the people she knew preferred prettier, purebred ones. Like British Shorthairs or Persians. Harold's family made wands, so they must be pretty well off, right? So, was this just a personal preference? Of course, she would never actually ask those questions, that would be terribly rude. If we're talking officially sold, then, 1. Harold didn't know what she was thinking. He scratched Tom under the chin and replied offhandedly. Oh, that's really not a lot, Hermione blurted out. Harold looked at her, wondering if she was smart or just plain dense. You do realize I'm only 11, right? 11 years old, hadn't even started magic school, and had already managed to make and sell a complete wand. Did she have any idea how impressive that was? Okay, Maybe she really didn't. Seeing the blank look in Hermione's eyes, Harold rubbed his forehead. He almost forgot, Hermione's parents were muggles. She'd had no prior exposure to the magical world, so it made sense she wouldn't understand. As for Neville sitting nearby, forget it, he didn't count. Seriously, Merlin's pants, he finally had a chance to show off, and it completely fell flat. Harold was already losing interest in the conversation, but Hermione clearly wasn't ready to let him go. It was rare to find a wizard willing to talk to her, she had tons of questions. What about Neville? He didn't know anything, he didn't count. Neville. To spark more conversation, Hermione even pulled out her wand. A beautiful vinewood wand. Neville, still unsure what was going on, followed suit when he saw Hermione suddenly bring up wands. Harold glanced over. Cherry wood, unicorn hair core, 11 inches. Status. Damaged. Traits. Rejection, spell effectiveness -50%, spell success rate -50%. High chance of backfire. Harold raised his eyebrows and carefully asked, "This wand, you didn't get it from Ollivander, did you?" It seemed unlikely, but he felt the need to confirm. If Ollivander had actually sold this to Neville out of greed, Harold would need to do some damage control. No, I didn't. Seeing that Harold was talking to him, Neville immediately got nervous. This was my dad's wand, he muttered with his head down. His voice was soft, and his face turned beet red. Both Harold and Hermione could see he was uncomfortable with the topic. So Harold didn't push it further. As long as it wasn't from their shop, that was good enough. Still, as a wandmaker, he felt obliged to give a little warning. I'd recommend getting a wand that's truly yours. This one doesn't suit you at all, it'll be hard to use. Going to school with a wand like that, was he trying to make an already hard curriculum even harder for himself? But it was my dad's wand, Neville said, looking up. This time, he didn't even stutter. A wand isn't like clothes or shoes. It's not a galleon either. It doesn't matter who it belonged to, it's meant for one person only. At least, most wands are, Harold shook his head and patiently explained. He wasn't making this up. Fred and George were as alike as twins could be, identical in looks and personality, closer than most siblings, even more so than many fathers and sons. And yet their wands were different. Fred's was dogwood, 13 3/4 inches. George's was beechwood, 13.5 inches. The only thing they shared was the unicorn hair core, everything else was different. Neville lowered his head, wanting to refute Harold but unsure how. His grandmother had told him that he needed to be just like his father, to make the Longbottom family proud again. And that meant starting with his father's wand. Besides, deep down, Neville also wanted to use that wand. It was the only time he felt, even just a little, like his parents were still with him. His head sank lower and lower, his face hidden, turning red and white by turns. Don't say that. Hermione, overcome with sympathy, couldn't take it anymore and spoke up in Neville's defense. It's just a wand. I've never heard of a weapon that couldn't be used by someone else. I think what matters most is learning the spells. I've read spellwork analysis and explanation and the most popular spells of the 20th century, Hermione said seriously, looking up at Neville. They all focus on incantations and wand movements. They don't mention the wand itself at all. That's because the authors never imagined anyone would use a wand that was so obviously a bad match. Harold muttered silently to himself. Choosing a wand that suits you was already considered common sense in the wizarding world, there was no need to spell it out. It's like how a Muggle book never starts by telling you that someone with nearsightedness shouldn't use reading glasses to look at it. Still, seeing the two of them, Harold held back his comments. One was a new student from a Muggle family, the other let his emotions override reason. Saying anything more would just make him seem cold-hearted. Once they got to school and experienced magic firsthand, they'd understand just how important a proper wand was to a wizard. End of chapter 9. Very rude. After the topic of wands was dropped, the compartment finally quieted down for once, mostly because Hermione didn't quite dare talk to Harold again, worried she might upset Neville further. Harold was more than happy to enjoy the peace. Once the train stopped bumping so much, he reopened the book in his hands. Compared to chatting with Miss Know-It-All, wands were far more interesting. This book had been given to him by Ollivander before departure, and a lot of its content was eye-opening for Harold. What could he say? Ollivander's wand shop had been around for over 2,000 years, even older than Hogwarts itself. And it had left behind far more than that small, shabby shop on Diagon Alley. Even though the book in Harold's hands wasn't from the oldest batch, only about 500 years old, it was more than enough for him. Ellipsis. From morning to afternoon, the sky gradually darkened, and when Harold finally looked up again, Hermione and Neville were gone. He was the only one left in the compartment. "We there yet?" Harold instinctively looked out the window. The sky hung low, covered in a gloomy gray that felt a bit oppressive. Just then, the lights in the carriage flickered on, casting a warm yellow glow that turned the windows into a mirror of pitch black. He couldn't see a thing outside. Right then, Hermione returned. "Harold, you," she opened the compartment door and paused slightly. "What is it?" "Ah, nothing." Hermione shook her head and explained, "I just thought you were still reading, so I came to remind you to hurry and change into your robes, we're almost there." "Thanks," Harold nodded. "You're welcome," Hermione replied. She'd come back to grab her luggage and figured she might as well remind Harold too. But before she could even lift her trunk, Harold stopped her. "No need. Someone else will handle the luggage." "You sure?" Hermione sounded skeptical. "Of course," Harold said with a smile. "If everyone had to drag their own trunks, the school's transport wouldn't be nearly enough." Hermione looked even more confused. She really wanted to ask what kind of transport he meant, but just then the train came to a complete stop. "Please leave your luggage on the train, we'll have it sent to the school for you." The announcement echoed through the train, confirming Harold's claim. They really didn't need to carry their luggage. First years, over here," came another unfamiliar voice from outside. "We'd better get going," Hermione said, watching as Harold pulled a small leather bag down from the rack. "It's just more reassuring to keep the valuables on you." Harold slung the bag over his shoulder and covered it with his cloak. During the process, the bag occasionally made faint clinking sounds. Hermione suddenly had a guess. It must be gold and silver coins. If so, then it made sense to keep them close. Her money was just stuffed into her pocket, not enough to need a whole bag. Not surprising, though. Wandmakers were like the arms dealers of the wizarding world, of course they weren't short on cash. Speaking of wealth, she'd just met another boy who was apparently from a very rich family, zero manners, walked around with two cronies, nose practically in the air. Compared to that, Harold's personality was far more pleasant. He was patient with both her and Neville. Just maybe, a bit too studious. He'd been reading the whole train ride. Even if it was a leisure book and not a textbook, she couldn't help but feel a little pressure. But Harold had no idea what Hermione was thinking. After changing into his robes, he followed the crowd off the train. Outside, a huge man holding a lantern was shouting loudly, "Sorry, Harry, I don't have time to chat right now. First years, this way." Neville, who had gotten off earlier, was already standing next to him, waving enthusiastically at Harold and Hermione. "This way, hurry up." "Neville," Hermione hurried over and asked, "Did you find your toad?" "No," Neville's face instantly fell. "I asked in every compartment, but everyone said they hadn't seen Trevor." "Maybe he's hiding somewhere," Hermione said. "Don't worry, I'll ask the conductor to help you check when they unload the luggage. The train's not that big. He's got to be on here somewhere." "Thank you, Hermione." Neville was so touched he was nearly in tears. He really meant it. In all his life, Hermione was the first stranger who had ever gone out of their way to help him like this. But before they could act, a loud screech from a cat drew everyone's attention. On the other side of the crowd, Harold was holding his pet by the scruff of its neck, forcibly prying something out of its mouth. A toad. Just then, a lantern swung overhead. In the sudden beam of light, Neville saw clearly what was in the cat's mouth. "Trevor," he shouted in delight, rushing over to snatch the toad from Harold's hand. "Thank you, don't mention it," Harold shook his head. He was about to say more, but Hagrid was already approaching. An 11-foot-tall giant made quite an impression on first years. Everyone's attention was drawn to him, Neville included. So Harold said no more. Led by Hagrid, the group started stumbling their way forward. Harold stayed at the back, looking down at Tom, who clearly wasn't thrilled. "I wasn't trying to steal your prey," Harold said, not even sure if Tom could understand. "But Trevor's a pet too, so technically you're colleagues. Personally, I think eating a colleague is very rude behavior." "Yowl," Tom howled. "So you agree, huh?" Harold said to himself, giving the cat a pat on the head. Tom was dumbfounded. When had he agreed? He'd clearly been cursing him just now. That was his prey, caught fair and square in the bushes. How was it a colleague? And even if it was, he'd eaten loads of pets back at the shop. If you counted by value, he was worth at least 15 galleons. Unfortunately, Harold couldn't understand a word of what he was saying and continued rambling. Before we get to the castle, let's make a deal, don't eat your coworkers, okay? Y'all, if you do, I'll have to make up the cost somewhere else, like maybe experimenting with hybrid magical creatures as wand cores or something. Harold narrowed his eyes. I remember the owls at Elop's Owl Emporium had some Kneazle blood in them. That's why they're so clever. You're probably the same, right? Meow Tilda. The pressure on his wrist suddenly eased, and a soft, wet feeling spread across his hand. Looking down, Harold saw that Tom, who had just been struggling like mad, had suddenly gone docile and was now licking his hand obediently. Even his meowing sounded more like a normal cat's. Still a bit gruff, like it couldn't quite figure out how to purr right. But that didn't matter. Good boy, Tom, Harold smiled, stroking the cat's head. I knew you'd understand me. End of chapter 10. We're all half-bloods, really. 20 minutes later, Hermione finally learned what Harold meant by transportation. Not in her wildest dreams had she expected that the first years would be crossing a lake by boat. And it was then she saw, rising tall at the far edge of the water, that magnificent castle. Its many windows shimmered under the starlit sky, mysterious and beautiful. Like most of the other first years, she stood rooted to the spot, mesmerized by the sight. Come along now, first years. If you want to sit in a warm hall and enjoy a nice big feast, you'd best get moving. But mind you, only 4 to a boat. Harry, over here, everyone else, follow up. Hagrid called, expertly guiding the new students. Hey, I know you. Harold looked up to see the boy speaking to him. Platinum blonde hair, pale complexion, wearing a look of arrogance tinged with spite. He seemed to have just been in an argument, probably lost, too, judging by the sharpness in his voice. I remember you, the boy repeated. You were at the wand shop, right? I was, Harold replied, glancing at the 2 boys standing beside him, big and stocky, like a pair of walking tree stumps. Oh, that's Crabbe and Goyle, the boy said. I'm Malfoy, Draco Malfoy. I'm guessing you're like us. Harold raised a brow. If you mean pure blood, sure. Then you must know who I am, don't you? Malfoy pressed. Or are you one of those clueless, dim types? His voice suddenly grew louder, like he wanted someone specific to hear it. Harold guessed it was the neighboring boat, and more precisely, the boy sitting on the left with the lightning-shaped scar, Harry Potter. Still, what kind of idiot tries to show off their family name in front of an Ollivander? Allow me to introduce myself. Harold Ollivander. Harold looked at the mildly smug Malfoy and couldn't help but chuckle a little. Fact is, when the first Malfoy rose to prominence, the Ollivanders had already been around on this land for 1,800 years. You follow? Silence fell over the boat. Then came a clear, unmistakable snort of laughter from the next boat over. Malfoy's pale face turned beet red in an instant. Not even when Harry had brushed him off on the train did he look this embarrassed. He hadn't expected to get humiliated here, but the worst part was, the guy wasn't even wrong. Harold also felt like laughing, but he held it in. All he could say was, Malfoy had brought it on himself. Sure, if we're talking gold, the Ollivanders probably rank near the bottom of the pure blood families. But if we're talking legacy and family history, sorry, there wasn't a single pure blood house in all of Britain that could compare, not even Hogwarts or Merlin himself. Hogwarts was founded 1,000 years ago, in the 10th century. Merlin's era, the time of King Arthur, was the 6th century. But the Ollivanders, the date's right there on the shopfront, 382 BC, 9 centuries before Merlin. Harold looked at Malfoy's flushed face and shrugged. Tisk, you saw me in the wand shop, why start this? Maybe it was just his imagination, but the air around them seemed to warm a little. Still, Harold didn't mean to make it too harsh. He offered a hand and said, proper introduction this time, Harold Ollivander. And yes, I know who you are, Hawthorne, unicorn hair, 10 inches, right? Harold's gesture came just in time. Malfoy's face quickly returned to normal. He wanted to slap that hand away, but after a brief hesitation, he gave up on the idea and reached out instead. Draco Malfoy, you already said that once. You'll be in Slytherin for sure, Malfoy said, quickly changing the subject. Maybe, Harold smiled. Again, did no one get how old 382 BC really was? If the Ollivanders cared about anything beyond wand-making, then when it came to bloodline bragging, even Salazar Slytherin himself would have to step aside. But all that stuff was meaningless. Trace your roots back far enough, and everyone's a half-blood. While the handshake smoothed things over here, the neighboring boat was far less pleased. I really thought Malfoy was about to get torn apart, Ron sighed. But he soon broke into a grin. Still, not bad. Did you see Malfoy's face? Redder than the train engine. Yeah, I saw it, Harry nodded. Wait a second. Hermione, sitting across from them, suddenly spoke. Did that Ollivander family really go back 1,800 years? Possibly, Ron scratched his head. Honestly, he wasn't sure. He just knew the name Ollivander was a big deal. His whole family had used their wands, his granddad, and his granddad's granddad too. But how many years exactly? Who goes looking that stuff up? The four kids on the boat fell into collective silence, no one quite knew what to say. Meanwhile, Harold and Malfoy actually seemed to be getting along well. In just a short while, Malfoy had already asked 3 times if it was really possible to make a wand turn silver and green. To this, Harold, having, accidentally, let that slip earlier, just shrugged and said it was still in the works. Early stages. Needed patience. I'll pay extra, no matter how many galleons. Malfoy thumped his chest. Silver with green trim, same colors as the Slytherin crest. He had to have it. Otherwise, what was the point of being a Slytherin? The boat drifted toward the center of the lake, moonlight casting a faint blush across Malfoy's face, though this time it was from excitement. Harold glanced at the 30-galleon deposit in his hand and smirked slightly. As he'd thought, coming to Hogwarts really was a profitable idea, easy money, honestly. Ellipsis. In this strange mix of tension and enthusiasm, the boats finally reached the opposite shore. Hagrid took the lead, walking up the stone steps and raising one massive fist to knock 3 times on the castle's front doors. The doors opened to reveal the stern face of Professor McGonagall, ready to lead the new students into the Great Hall. Harold stayed at the back, and just as he stepped into the castle, Hagrid, who was about to leave, suddenly stopped. What you said at the wand shop, was that true? He asked in a low voice, glancing nervously inside, as if afraid McGonagall might have heard. But she was already inside the hall and hadn't caught a word. What was? You know, about my umbrella. Hagrid looked even more nervous, instinctively patting his coat pocket. Oh, of course it was true, Harold replied. If you ever need the help. I live right next to the Forbidden Forest, Hagrid blurted out, clearly relieved. End of chapter 11, The Sorting. Only after Harold gave him a definite answer did Hagrid finally turn and head down the steps. Inside the castle, Harry Potter had been watching, well, more like sneaking glances at Hagrid all along the way, and just happened to catch the two of them whispering at the back of the line. For some reason, as soon as Harold entered the castle, Harry instinctively walked over. Sorry to bother you, what were you two talking about just now? Harold blinked in surprise. He hadn't expected the boy who lived to be this friendly. You'd think that after Malfoy's provocation, Harry wouldn't be all that keen on chatting with any purebloods right now. Sorry, I didn't mean anything by it. Harry realized his sudden question might have come off a bit rude, so he quickly waved his hands, trying to explain. It's just, I know Hagrid too. I mean, if you need any help. Thanks for the offer, but it's fine, Harold said casually. He's just got something that's broken, and I can fix it. I see. Right, I'm Harry Potter. Harold Ollivander. We met in Diagon Alley, but your attention was all on your wand at the time. Really? Sorry, I don't remember at all. No need to apologize. Very few wizards stay calm when they get their first wand. Ellipsis. The two of them chatted idly, drawing more and more attention from the rest of the first years. Malfoy kept glancing over, and each time, his expression was different, bitterly entertaining to watch. Why, they were both pure bloods, so why was Potter talking to Harold instead of him? It just wasn't fair. Ron felt the same, though his face was more wary than jealous. After everything earlier, he'd instinctively lumped Harold into the same category as Malfoy. And everyone knew the Weasleys and Malfoys didn't get along. So the more Harry talked to Harold, the more irritated Ron became. Thankfully, before the mood could sour further, Professor McGonagall returned and led them all into the Great Hall. The hall was packed with students, but the moment McGonagall walked in with a long line of first years behind her, all eyes turned to the newcomers. Nervous. Most of them looked pretty nervous, but they were also awestruck by the sight before them. The ceiling was a vast, enchanted night sky. 1,000 lit candles floated beneath it, as if suspended beneath the stars themselves. and around the room hovered a dozen or so pale, ghost-like figures. Ghosts. Neville and a few of the more timid kids looked ready to collapse, stumbling their way forward. Hermione, standing beside him, looked a little better, but her face was pale and her hands were clutching the corner of her robe tightly. Ghosts, a singing hat, this was turning her entire 11 years of understanding upside down. Eventually, the Sorting Hat finished its song, and the entire hall sat up a little straighter. The sorting will now begin. When I call your name, come forward, put on the hat, and sit on the stool. Professor McGonagall glanced around the crowd of students. Hannah Abbott, ellipsis. As more and more names were called, Harold suddenly realized something: he was still holding Tom. Normally, pets were sent ahead with the luggage, but since Tom had chased a co-worker off the train, Harold had been forced to bring him along. But he couldn't exactly walk up for the sorting with a cat in his arms. That'd be way too showy, and honestly kind of pretentious. Harold Ollivander. Professor McGonagall's voice rang out. No time to think. Harold quickly dropped Tom onto the ground. Don't run off, he whispered hastily, then strode toward the front. Look, it's Harold. Over at the Gryffindor table, Hermione turned excitedly to Neville, who had just been sorted into the same house. I really hope he ends up in Gryffindor too, she whispered. A passing ghost happened to hear her and immediately shook his head. That won't happen. Why not? Hermione didn't get it. 4 houses. Should be a 1 in 4 chance, right? Why was it impossible? Because he's an Ollivander, said nearly headless Nick with a smile. And Ollivanders almost always go to Ravenclaw. There's just no way he'll be Gryffindor. The Sorting Hat bellowed. The entire hall fell into a strange silence. Some students began clapping instinctively, but a good number just sat there in stunned disbelief, staring ahead. Even the professors at the head table had stopped clapping and were all looking toward the Sorting Hat. Gradually, the applause faded. A weird hush fell over the great hall. Snape narrowed his eyes. Professor Flitwick rubbed his ears. Even Dumbledore leaned forward slightly. Albus, Professor McGonagall turned toward him, clearly looking for confirmation. The Sorting Hat doesn't make mistakes, Dumbledore said firmly. Seems like it's given us another big surprise, Snape said with a cold twist of his mouth. Yes, Flitwick nodded beside him. Just like when that black boy ended up in Gryffindor decades ago. But this one's even more extreme. At the center of everyone's attention, Harold calmly removed the hat and handed it back to McGonagall. Mr. Ollivander, I respect the sorting system, Professor, Harold said evenly. But can I ask the Sorting Hat one more question? I was a bit rushed just now and forgot. Go ahead. McGonagall hesitated, then placed the hat back on his head. You again, came the soft voice by his ear. No matter what you say, I won't change my mind, you belong in Gryffindor. No, you misunderstood. I just want to ask you a question, Harold said out loud, loud enough that many people nearby could hear. What question? Go on, ask. Do you have a favorite kind of wood? Ellipsis. Wood. The hall blinked, collectively baffled. No one understood what the question was supposed to mean. No one except Dumbledore, whose face shifted subtly. He'd already heard rumors that the Ollivanders had a new kind of prodigy, one who could craft wand cores out of all kinds of bizarre materials. He couldn't be serious. No, that was ridiculous. There was no way he was thinking about using the Sorting Hat as a wand core, right? Dumbledore shook his head. Harold was probably just trying to mess with the hat. Such an attitude, definitely not very Ollivander-like. By now, Harold had calmly walked over and sat down at the Gryffindor table. The sorting continued as if nothing strange had happened. Next, Harry Potter. End of chapter 12, Gryffindor. The famous boy who lived had captured almost everyone's attention, almost. A few were still stuck on another, very specific mystery. Like the ever-curious Hermione. Sir Nicholas, why did you say earlier that an Ollivander couldn't possibly be sorted into Gryffindor? Did I say that? The ghost replied, tossing his head back onto his neck. When the Sorting Hat had bellowed out its decision, his head had nearly fallen off. Thankfully, a thin strip of skin had kept it hanging, hence the nickname, Nearly Headless Nick. You did say it. Hermione nodded firmly, even pulling in witnesses. I'll back her up. So will I. Fred and George, the Weasley twins, chimed in from either side. They were just as curious. They didn't know exactly what had happened, but judging by the professor's expressions, it had to be something juicy. Well, all right, I suppose it's not that big a secret. Nick glanced toward the far end of the Gryffindor table at Harold and lowered his voice. As far as I know, ever since Hogwarts was founded, not a single Ollivander has been sorted into Gryffindor. Not one. Whoa, Fred exclaimed. No way, over 1,000 years. I've been at Hogwarts for 5 centuries, and I've never seen it happen. But why? Hermione pressed, intrigued. I don't know for sure, said Nick thoughtfully. But there's a legend. What kind of legend? Now mind you, this is all hearsay, nothing verified, the ghost clarified, then continued. Apparently, it has something to do with one of the 4 founders, Godric Gryffindor. Though he was a wizard, he had a particular fondness for using swords over wands. In fact, he commissioned a goblin-made sword, which he carried everywhere. He even openly claimed that his sword was more useful than a wand. And the heirloom he left behind? Gryffindor's sword. And since the Ollivanders are a wand-making family, well, naturally, they weren't too fond of Gryffindor's views. So then why did Harold get sorted into Gryffindor? Hermione asked. No idea, Nick replied, his head wobbling loosely on his neck. Maybe he's not really an Ollivander. Or maybe he's just different. With that, nearly headless Nick drifted away. But everyone else was still caught up in what he'd said. Ancient grudges between Hogwarts founders. Who wouldn't be interested in that? Soon, all eyes turned back to Harold. Not even Harry Potter's own sorting into Gryffindor could fully distract them. At the Gryffindor table, Harold sat closest to the staff table, expressionless as he stared at the sorting hat. He couldn't believe it himself. He'd expected Ravenclaw, or even Hufflepuff, but Gryffindor. Really, the hat hadn't even paused for a second, it had barely touched his head before blurting it out. Just like Malfoy. Efficient, if nothing else. But why Gryffindor? Even as the sorting continued, Harold still hadn't figured it out. The sorting hat and its little stool were eventually carried off by Professor McGonagall, and in a blink, the once empty long tables filled with steaming dishes. The aroma of food snapped Harold back to reality. After a full day on the train, he was starving. Well, whatever. Time to eat. Golden roast chicken and creamy soups filled his mouth, instantly recharging his tired body and mind. As he calmed down, Harold's thoughts drifted back to what the hat had said the second time he'd worn it. He was a good fit for Gryffindor. Harold's knife froze mid-cut through a pork chop. Come to think of it, some of his earlier plans, taken in isolation, were indeed pretty Gryffindor. But he hadn't even acted on them yet. They were just ideas. Did that really count? Harold sighed. Some things were once-in-a-lifetime opportunities, and they always seemed to happen around Harry Potter. Take the 3-headed dog, or the basilisk, for example, rare creatures, perfect for wand cores. Letting those go would be a crime. With that logic in mind, Harold slowly accepted his placement in Gryffindor. It's not like he had a choice anyway. Hogwarts had no precedent for switching houses. And being closer to Harry Potter might actually make some things easier. Harold told himself that. It sort of worked. At least, he could now enjoy his meal. He just wasn't sure how old Ollivander would take it. As Harold bit into a piece of steak, he couldn't help but think of his grandfather. Still, it would probably be fine. As far as he could remember, his grandfather had never shown any particular bias against Gryffindor. He'd always said that as long as Harold got into Hogwarts, that was enough, never cared about the house. Ellipsis. Distracted by his own thoughts, Harold didn't even notice when the dessert vanished or when Dumbledore started speaking. He only vaguely remembered bits and pieces, something about first years staying out of the Forbidden Forest, a specific classroom on the 4th floor being off limits. Oh, and Quidditch tryouts, PFFT. What kind of serious wizard played Quidditch? Once the school song was sung, quite the spectacle, Harold stood and followed the line of first years out of the hall. On their way up the stairs, he spotted Neville walking just ahead. Come to think of it, back at platform 9 3/4, Mrs. Longbottom had said she hoped both he and Neville would end up in Gryffindor. She'd been right. Did the Longbottoms have the sight or something? Harold, maybe sensing his gaze, Neville turned back at just the right moment. Are you okay? He asked. Why wouldn't I be? Well, the sorting, Hermione added, stepping in. I heard the Ollivanders don't get along with Gryffindor. Really? Harold was genuinely baffled. For a second, he wondered if he was some kind of fake Ollivander. I never heard that. Who told you? Sir Nicholas, Hermione said. The Gryffindor ghost, most people call him nearly headless Nick. He said Godric Gryffindor liked swords more than wands, so his ideas didn't align with the Ollivanders, who make wands. That's why your families never got along. She quickly recapped what the ghost had told them earlier. Maybe there's some truth to it, Harold said after listening, completely unfazed. But it's been 1,000 years. Who still cares about ancient grudges that small? Waste of time, but it's a clash of ideals. That's not small, Hermione said, looking confused. Don't overthink it, Harold chuckled. Remember what my grandfather said when you bought your wand? Which part? The wand chooses the wizard. Oh, right, I remember. That's the key, Harold said. We believe the wand chooses the wizard. How the wizard chooses, doesn't matter. Personally, I think this whole clash of ideals is nonsense. Take Neville, for example. He loves his toad, takes it everywhere. But when it's time to send a letter, he still uses an owl. The owl is the wand. I see, Hermione nodded, half understanding. I always thought that whole wand chooses the wizard thing was just for drama. You can think of it that way too. End of chapter.